Even 20 years later, this sci-fi movie still captivates with its imaginative and awe-inspiring scenes. The film not only boldly predicts the future trajectory of human society but also uses the protagonist's experiences to impart a profound or perhaps simple truth to the world. The brilliant scientist Alexander developed a time machine solely to go back in time to save a life. On Valentine's Day 1895, Alexander asked his girlfriend, Emma, out to the ski slopes by the park. He intended to propose to her with a moonstone ring he had crafted himself. However, a robber suddenly emerged from the woods and threatened the couple with a gun, demanding their money. Not wanting trouble, Alexander complied, but the greedy robber then set his sights on the ring in Emma's hand. During the scuffle, the gun accidentally went off, and poor Emma was shot dead. To save Emma, the grief-stricken Alexander locked himself away and began studying physics day and night. 3 years later, he successfully built the first time machine in human history. Although the machine had not yet been tested, he immediately sat in it and pulled the lever without hesitation. With the machine powered up, the light wheels on either side started spinning rapidly. In the next second, a beam of light shot out from the center of the light wheel, followed by the beam scattering in all directions, then quickly gathering together to eventually form a dazzling ball of light, completely wrapping the time machine within. Alexander then moved the time lever, and as the clock hands began to spin backward rapidly, he successfully traveled back to that night 3 years ago. He then grabbed Emma and ran off without looking back. All he had to do now was to take Emma away from this place of wrongdoing. They stopped in the middle of a busy street, and Alexander felt relieved. But unexpectedly, while he was buying flowers for Emma, a car accident claimed her life. Unable to accept this outcome, Alexander realized that even if he traveled back 1,000 times, he couldn't change Emma's fate. To find a way to alter the past, he decided to search in a more advanced future. He got back in the time machine and set the target for 100 years later. The time machine entered the time tunnel again, and everything around Alexander sped up dreamily. Vines quickly covered the windows, leaves swarmed over the glass like locusts, and blooming flowers quickly wilted. His lab was transformed over time into a changing auto shop. Across the street, the clothing store rapidly changed the display of its windows, with beautiful dresses gradually shortening until they vanished. In shock, Alexander glanced at Emma's photo but accidentally dropped the locket out of the time machine. In the blink of an eye, Emma's photo turned yellow and blackened, and the locket turned to dust. When Alexander looked up, he saw the world outside also undergoing dramatic changes. Skyscrapers shot up, planes flew higher, and satellites entered space, and humanity successfully established a colony on the moon. When the screen displayed the future as now, he quickly pulled the brake. It seemed the future he wanted to visit was here. In 2030, he carefully exited the time machine and curiously looked around. There were massive screens that could emit sound, bustling crowds, and bikes that could be unlocked with a swipe. While Alexander was filled with emotions, a blonde beauty unexpectedly greeted him. The woman was curious about his vintage attire and even mistook Alexander's time machine for a large soybean milk machine. Alexander immediately headed to the National Library of the Future, hoping to find the answers he sought. Unexpectedly, the books of this era had become antiques. Just as he was about to research time travel, he was interrupted by a peculiar figure. It turned out to be a nuclear-powered AI knowledge repository, capable of storing all human knowledge from ancient times to the present in an egg-sized sphere. Alexander eagerly asked the AI how to change the past. However, the database had no practical application for time travel. The AI suggested he wait a few more years to see. So, Alexander once again rode the time machine to 2037, but when the machine stopped, he was greeted by a post-apocalyptic world. As he looked around bewildered, two soldiers suddenly rushed towards him from an armored vehicle, intending to take him away. From their conversation, Alexander learned that during humanity's colonization of the moon, merchants trying to profit from selling lunar soil accidentally destroyed the moon with a nuclear bomb. This led to the moon's disintegration and a catastrophic chain reaction on Earth. Panicking, Alexander rushed back to the time machine, intending to leave immediately. However, a sudden explosion knocked him unconscious. Fortunately, the time machine accidentally activated amid the shaking. Thus, Alexander narrowly escaped the apocalypse but remained unconscious for a long time. The film's most sci-fi and surreal scene then unfolded. Green trees turned to yellow dust, mountains turned to oceans, rivers cut valleys until they became abysses, and mountains rose to form magnificent plateaus. The time machine remained like a sparkling gem, steadfast in the stream of history. However, the subsequent ice age buried it deeply. Alexander eventually awakened in the cold. Then, the glaciers melted, and the land turned green again. After countless years passed, a dazed Alexander hurriedly stopped the machine. Little did he know it was now 800,000 years later. When he woke up, he found himself in a simple hut. Quickly putting on his clothes, he stepped out and was stunned by what he saw. These fan-shaped buildings were like gems embedded on the cliffs. The residents moved like ants, methodically traversing the rope ladders. A bewildered Alexander wanted to ask the villagers which era they were in, but he couldn't understand their language. In the midst of the awkward situation, Mara indicated that she understood English. It turned out she was the village teacher, proficient in several ancient languages. As Alexander was about to continue his inquiry, a horn sounded from afar. The next moment, the villagers scattered, hurriedly pulling their boats from the river as if they were deliberately avoiding something. When night fell, Alexander looked up at the sky and saw the moon, now reduced to scattered fragments. It became clear that the human world had indeed suffered destruction, and Mara and her people were among the few survivors. The next day, Mara brought Alexander to his time machine. Seeing that he seemed ready to leave, Mara suddenly asked Alexander to take her younger brother with him. As Alexander was still puzzled, the direction of the village suddenly resonated with an urgent horn blast. Sensing trouble, Mara immediately ran back, and Alexander, bewildered, followed closely behind. When they reached the scene, they saw a group of humanoid creatures frantically hunting the villagers. The creatures were robust, and their fearsome appearance scared the villagers into frantic flight. The monsters are seen marking their prey with concealed weapons, but any villager who was shot is quickly grabbed and dragged underground by the monsters. At that moment, Mara was also hit. When Alexander pulled out the dart, he found it covered with a foul-smelling poison. Meanwhile, Mara's brother was also suddenly struck by a poison dart. In his haste, Alexander had to prioritize protecting the young boy. When they finally turned back, they saw Mara being seized by the creature. Alexander rushed forward to rescue her but was too late. In his fury, he questioned the village chief about why they did not fight back against the creatures. The chief replied that they had lived this way for generations, and anyone who led a rebellion would only die quicker. The villagers' passivity left Alexander feeling helpless. No wonder he hadn't seen any elders in the village. They had all been taken by the creatures to their lairs. With no other option, Alexander approached Mara's brother, hoping he could provide useful information about the creatures' lairs. Although the boy hesitated, he eventually told Alexander that the answers he sought might be found in the cave behind the village. When they went to the cave after dark, Alexander unexpectedly saw the familiar orb again. It turned out that this was the site of the New York Public Library. 800,000 years ago, Alexander had once asked the AI there about time travel. To his surprise, the intelligent butler was still operational. What astonished Alexander even more was that it remembered their conversation from all those years ago. Alexander didn't mince words and directly asked where the creatures' lairs were. However, the intelligent butler didn't answer directly, instead explaining the origins of these creatures to Alexander. These creatures were also a branch of humanity. Since the moon exploded, the surviving humans split into two groups. One wave is the Eloi, the tribal primitives who live on the surface, the primitive tribe that saved Alexander. The other group, living underground, were the Morlocks, the terrifying hairy creatures that came out during the day. To find these creatures, one only needed to venture deep into the forest and follow the heavy breathing sounds. Sure enough, following the intelligent butler's tip, Alexander and the boy soon found the creature's lair. He sent the boy back to get help, while he ventured into the cave alone to rescue Mara. Inside, the cave was a labyrinth, filled with spinning gears and pipes, and the hairy creatures were busy forging steel. Clearly, their technology level was far more advanced than the Eloi on the surface. Soon, Alexander found Mara's clothing in another chamber. Looking up, he saw a horrifying scene. In front of him were tools for dismembering bodies. In a panic, he accidentally triggered a drain switch and fell into it. To his dismay, the next sight was even more revolting. Seeing the pool filled with corpses, Alexander scrambled in fright. His cries drew the attention of the creatures. The next moment, he was locked in an even darker and more confined cell. To his surprise, he found Mara alive there, but she stared blankly ahead. Following Mara's gaze, he saw an oddly-looking man sitting on a stone chair. The man's entire body was deathly pale, but he still retained a human appearance. Facing Alexander's arrival, Morlock appeared very calm. It was also under Morlock's narration that Alexander finally understood the cruel truth of human evolution over the past 800,000 years. It turns out that after the moon's great explosion, the Morlocks who escaped underground gradually lost their ability to survive under the sunlight. However, to survive, they evolved into beings with extraordinarily strong bodies, and Morlock is the highest evolution of their kind. Not only did they retain human intelligence, but they also gained the ability to control the minds of others. So strictly speaking, the alloy on the surface are just food that the Morlocks have domesticated. Just like the chickens, ducks, pigs, and dogs that humans domesticated 800,000 years ago, Morlock had long seen through Alexander's thoughts and recognized that he was not a human from this era. He knew that Alexander had created the time machine to save Emma. With the time machine, they had the chance to meet, perhaps to make Alexander give up completely. Morlock answered the question Alexander had been desperately seeking for 800,000 years: why the past cannot be changed. He told Alexander that it was Emma's death that prompted him to invent the time machine, but if Emma hadn't died, then he wouldn't have created the time machine to go back and save her. So this is essentially a causal loop paradox. Seeing that Alexander's confusion was finally resolved, Morlock didn't strike him down. Instead, he let him take the time machine and leave as soon as possible. Alexander obediently walked towards the time machine that was about to start. However, at this moment, his heart fell into confusion. If he was destined not to save Emma, then what was the point of him returning to the past? When he looked at Mara's hopeful face in the cage, he suddenly made a bold decision. Just as the time machine started, he suddenly pulled Morlock into the machine, attempting to use the passage of time to end him. But alas, he was no match for Morlock. Seeing that it was a critical moment, he exerted all his strength to initiate the time machine's process. In the blink of an eye, at the speed of time millions of times faster, Morlock, who fell outside the light shield, instantly aged and died, turning into a pile of bones and then disappearing. When Alexander pulls the handbrake down again, time has come to 700 million years later. Looking around, the ground was covered with wild sand, dark and without sunlight, and everywhere were the skeletal castles of the Morlocks. Seeing this despairing scene, Alexander realized that killing one Morlock couldn't solve the underlying problem of humanity's decline in the future, so he went back to the past again and rescued Mara. Then he used his pocket watch to initiate the time machine's self-destruct program. Following that, he took Mara and escaped from the monster's lair. Finally, with the stopping of the time machine, all the monsters in the underground lair were completely obliterated in a violent explosion. And Alexander and Mara managed to survive. But without the time machine, he stayed in that era, hoping to lead humanity into civilization once again with his efforts. Just as Morlock said in the end, actually, everyone has what's called a time machine in their hearts. Those that take us back to the past are called memories, and those that keep us moving forward are called dreams. The movie The Time Machine tells us a lesson through Alexander's journey. If the painful past cannot be changed, then seize the present and use your dreams to change the future.